They locked me out of my own server while I was on stage accepting a tech award. That was 6 weeks ago. But if we're being honest, and at this point, why hold back? This story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with a toaster, a power surge, and the first line of code I ever wrote while crying in a sublet in Detroit. My name is Emily Rhodes. I'm 34. And until recently, I was the Chief Innovation Officer at a company I built from nothing. I specialize in AI systems engineering and consumer behavior market analysis. At least, that's what my LinkedIn profile says. What it doesn't say is that I know exactly how to reclaim what's mine when someone tries to take it. The Detroit winter had settled in like an unwelcome house guest, bringing with it the kind of cold that seeps through brick walls and into your bones. I had moved there after my previous startup collapsed, a mobile app that helped people track their carbon footprint. Noble idea, terrible timing, worse execution. The venture capital money dried up faster than I could pivot, and suddenly I was subletting a drafty one-bedroom apartment with yellowing wallpaper and windows that rattled when the wind blew. On my third morning there, I tried to make toast and blown the main circuit breaker. The entire building went dark. My neighbors, mostly grad students and gig workers, banged on my door demanding to know what happened. I apologized profusely, promised to replace their spoiled food, and retreated back into my apartment, mortified and broke. That night, unable to sleep and running on a dangerous mixture of desperation and gas station coffee, I started coding. Not for a job or a client, I didn't have either, but because I needed to feel in control of something, anything. I had been obsessing over a pattern I'd noticed during my previous startup's death spiral, the way consumer spending shifted dramatically in response to media controversies. It wasn't just that people stopped buying from brands embroiled in scandal. That was obvious. It was the ripple effects, the way adjacent industries either suffered or thrived in the aftermath. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by that strange clarity that sometimes comes with exhaustion. I was building something that could map these patterns, predict these ripples. By morning, I had the skeleton of what would later become my masterpiece, a predictive consumer intent model that could anticipate market shifts based on emerging media trends with uncanny accuracy. I called it NeuroGauge. Over the next 8 months, I refined the model in between freelance gigs that barely covered my rent. I scraped public data, built better algorithms, and tested the system against historical events. When a prominent shoe brand faced backlash over a tone-deaf ad campaign, NeuroGauge correctly predicted not only the 17% drop in their stock price, but also the 9% increase in sales for their most authentic-seeming competitor. I knew I had something valuable, but I had no idea how to scale it. My previous failure had left me gun-shy about approaching investors again, but as luck would have it, I didn't have to. They found me. It started with an email from someone named Alexander Dyer, claiming to represent Hollowbrook Capital. According to my hasty Google search, they were a mid-sized venture capital firm with a decent track record of tech investments. The email praised a blog post I'd written about consumer behavior prediction models and requested a meeting. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, won out. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Alexander was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of polish that comes from old money trying to look new. He listened intently as I explained NeuroGauge, asking surprisingly technical questions that indicated he had actually done his homework. We don't usually approach pre-seed startups, he admitted, stirring his untouched Americano. But your model solves a problem our portfolio companies keep running into. What's your valuation? I almost laughed. Valuation? It's just me and my laptop in a sublet with questionable wiring. His smile was practiced but genuine. Emily, you're sitting on gold. We want to help you mine it. 2 weeks and several meetings later, I was signing papers in Hollowbrook's gleaming downtown office. The deal seemed almost too good to be true. They would provide $3 million in seed funding, office space, and a team to help scale NeuroGauge into a full-fledged SaaS platform. In return, they wanted 40% equity and a seat on the board. There was just one catch. They wanted me to sell the existing IP to a new entity they would create, with me as the majority shareholder and chief innovation officer. The price? $1. It's standard procedure, Alexander assured me. Cleanest way to set up the corporate structure. You'll still own 60% of the new company, and we'll build this together. I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. Look, I said, I'm not signing away my intellectual property for $1 without some protection. Alexander nodded, as if he'd been expecting this. What did you have in mind? If I'm ever terminated without cause, I want the right to buy back the entire company for $1. He laughed, then realized I wasn't joking. Emily, that's not how this works. Then this doesn't work, I said, standing up. I wasn't bluffing. After my last failure, I'd promised myself I'd never again lose control of something I built. There was a long silence. Alexander studied me with new eyes, reassessing. Let me talk to my partners, he finally said. To my surprise, they agreed. The clause was buried in the contract as Section 17B, written in the kind of legal language that made my eyes glaze over. But my own lawyer, a college friend who'd done well in corporate law, assured me it was ironclad. They'll never trigger this, he said. It would be corporate suicide, but it's good insurance. I signed. The dollar changed hands. NeuroGauge, now officially NeuroGauge Technologies Inc., was born. The first year was a dream. We moved into sleek offices in downtown Detroit, hired a team of brilliant engineers and data scientists, and refined the product. Our first major client, North End Retail, signed on after a demo that left their CMO wide-eyed with possibilities. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list of Fortune 500 companies eager to use our platform. I was still involved in every aspect of the business, from product development to client meetings. Alexander and the Hollowbrook team seemed content to let me lead, offering advice and connections but respecting my vision. Then things began to change. It started with the addition of 2 new executives, Mark Vellner as CFO and Sienna Morgan as VP of Product Inspiration. Mark came with an MBA from Wharton and absolutely zero technical understanding of what we did. Sienna's background was in fashion tech and trend forecasting, whatever that meant. We're entering a growth phase, Alexander explained when I questioned the hires. We need to professionalize the operation. I didn't argue. After all, I had never scaled a company before. Maybe this was normal. But small changes began to accumulate. Our weekly product development meetings became brand energy sessions. Client pitches focused less on the technical capabilities of our AI and more on vague promises of consumer insight synergy. Mark began questioning our R&D expenditures, suggesting we focus on enhancing existing offerings rather than building new features. The first real red flag came when Sienna suggested rebranding NeuroGauge Sentinel, our flagship product, to ShoppyBop AI, complete with a heart-shaped logo. It's more accessible, she explained, showing me mood boards covered in pastel colors and bubble fonts. More emotionally resonant with the current market. It's an enterprise B2B product, I countered. Our clients are data analysts and marketing strategists, not teenagers shopping for lip gloss. She smiled thinly. Emily, no offense, but consumer psychology has evolved since you founded the company. Trust me on this. I should have fought harder, but I was busy with actual product development and client relationships. So ShoppyBop AI it became, though I refused to use the name in meetings with our technical team. The quarterly board meeting was when everything came to a head. I arrived early, as usual, prepared to present our new predictive modeling improvements. But when I walked in, Mark and Sienna were already there, deep in conversation with Alexander and the other Hollowbrook partners. They fell silent when they saw me. Emily, Alexander's smile was too bright. Just in time. Mark and Sienna have prepared a comprehensive overview of our strategic direction. I took my seat, confused. I thought I was presenting the Q3 roadmap. We'll get to that, Mark said smoothly. But first, we want to share some exciting developments. What followed was a 60-slide presentation outlining a complete overhaul of NeuroGauge, Sorry, ShopeeBop AI. They wanted to pivot from deep predictive analytics to a more accessible dashboard with intuitive visualizations and trend indicators. They spoke about democratizing market intelligence and empowering the intuitive marketer. It was neurogauge, lobotomized. When I tried to interject, Alexander gently suggested we hold questions until the end. When the end finally came, Mark smoothly transitioned to budget projections without pausing for discussion. Finally, I couldn't stay silent. This completely undermines the core value proposition of our technology, I said, trying to keep my voice level. We're not selling pretty dashboards. We're selling predictive accuracy that no competitor can match. Sienna tilted her head sympathetically. Emily, we all appreciate your legacy contribution, but markets evolve, and we need to evolve with them. Legacy contribution? I echoed incredulously. I built this entire system. The algorithm you're suggesting we simplify is the only reason any of these companies pay us. I think what Sienna means, Alexander interjected, is that we should be cautious about becoming too attached to any particular technical implementation. The business needs to transcend individual components. Individual components? My voice had risen despite my best efforts. You mean the core intellectual property that this entire company is built on? The room fell silent. Mark cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short break, he suggested. In the hallway, Alexander pulled me aside. Emily, I understand your concerns, but you need to trust the process. This is how companies grow. By gutting what makes them valuable, I asked. He sighed. The board is concerned that the company is too dependent on you personally. That's a risk factor for our next funding round. So make me less essential by making the product worse. Brilliant strategy. No one is saying that, he replied, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Just try to keep an open mind. I returned to the meeting and sat through the rest of it in silence. But that night, alone in my apartment, a much nicer one than my old sublet, but somehow feeling just as cold, I pulled out my original contract and read through it carefully. Section 17B was still there, buried in legal jargon. In the event of termination of the Chief Innovation Officer without cause, said officer retains the right to purchase all intellectual property and assets of the company for the sum of $1 $1, payable within 30 days of such termination. I took a deep breath and called Julian Price, my lawyer friend who had reviewed the original contract. They're going to push me out, I told him. I need to be ready. Julian didn't sound surprised. The Hollowbrook playbook, he said grimly. They do this. Find brilliant founders, scale their companies, then extract them when they want to flip the business or take it in a different direction. Can they fire me? I own 60% of the company. On paper, yes. But check your shareholder agreement. I bet there's language about board composition that effectively gives them control in certain scenarios. He was right. Though I owned the majority of shares, the board had been structured to give Hollowbrook effective control over major decisions, including executive appointments. So what do? I asked. Wait, Julian advised. Document everything. Let them make the first move. If, when, they terminate you, we'll be ready with Section 17B. I wrote a check for $1 that night and sealed it in an envelope. Then I waited, going through the motions at work while quietly backing up everything I could legally access. I noticed my system permissions being subtly restricted, first from financial systems, then from the client database, and finally from parts of the codebase I had personally written. They were boxing me in, preparing for my exit, but I was preparing too. The email came 3 weeks later, a calendar invitation for a 4:30 p.m. meeting with HR. No subject, no agenda. Classic firing protocol. I arrived 5 minutes early, the envelope with the check burning a hole in my jacket pocket. Mark, Sienna, and Heather from HR were waiting, their expressions a carefully calibrated blend of solemnity and corporate detachment. Emily, Mark began, first, we want to thank you for everything you've done for neurogauge. I noticed he used the original name. Interesting choice for this particular conversation. After careful consideration, we've decided the company needs to move in a new strategic direction, and that requires different leadership for the next phase of growth. I nodded, saying nothing. Your contributions have been invaluable, Sienna added, her voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. You've built an amazing foundation that we'll continue to build upon. We've prepared a very generous separation package, Heather said, sliding a folder across the table. 6 months' salary, accelerated vesting of your options, and an ongoing consulting arrangement if you're interested. I didn't touch the folder. Is this termination with or without cause? They exchanged glances. Without cause, Heather confirmed. This is strictly a strategic realignment, not a reflection on your performance. I nodded again, still not reaching for the folder. I'll have my lawyer review the paperwork. Of course, Mark said, a flicker of relief crossing his face. We'd like to announce this transition next week, so if you could sign by Friday. I'll need my full 30 days as specified in my contract, I said calmly. His smile tightened. The package includes payment in lieu of notice. We think it's best for everyone if we make a clean break. Translation: they wanted me gone immediately. I understand, I said, standing up. I'll clean out my office now. They seemed surprised by my lack of resistance. As I handed over my laptop and badge to Heather, Sienna actually looked concerned. Emily, I hope you know this isn't personal. I smiled for the first time since entering the room. Of course not. It's just business. I walked out of the building for what I thought would be the last time, the envelope still in my pocket. I hadn't presented it yet. Timing was everything. The next morning, Julian filed the paperwork. A formal notice invoking Section 17B, along with the $1 check and a brief letter stating my intention to repurchase all intellectual property and assets of NeuroGage Technologies, Inc. The documents were delivered to Hollowbrook Capital on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, my email and phone were blowing up with messages from Alexander, Mark, and Hollowbrook's legal team. I ignored them all. On Wednesday, I received a formal letter from their attorneys claiming that Section 17B was unenforceable and contrary to the established intent of the parties. Julian responded with a single paragraph reminding them that the clause had been specifically negotiated and included at my insistence, with full knowledge of all parties. Then we waited. On Friday, Julian called with news. They blinked, he said, sounding both surprised and impressed. Their lawyers just contacted me. Turns out they never properly completed the corporate restructuring after the initial investment. Technically, NeuroGage Technologies, Inc. is still a separate legal entity from the holding company they created, and you still own 60% of it. What does that mean? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was going. It means Section 17B is not only enforceable, it's a legal nightmare for them. If they fight this, they risk losing not just the IP but all the subsequent development, client relationships, everything. So they have to accept the dollar. They're trying to negotiate. They're offering $5 million to void the clause. I laughed. $5 million for something worth at least 100 times that? Tell them no. Emily, $5 million is a lot of money, and fighting them could take years. I'm not fighting them, I said. I'm taking back what's mine. $1, as agreed. After another week of legal maneuvering, Hollowbrook capitulated. The transfer was executed with minimal ceremony, a brief meeting with attorneys present, signatures exchanged, and my dollar accepted. I walked out as the sole owner of NeuroGage Technologies, Inc., including all its intellectual property. Of course, I didn't get the office, the staff, or the existing client contracts. Those belonged to the Hollowbrook Holding Company. But I had something far more valuable, the technology itself and the legal right to use it however I wanted. Within days, the story leaked. Fast Tech Weekly ran with the headline, "The $1 Revenge. Founder reclaims AI startup using obscure contract clause." LinkedIn was ablaze with hot takes, ranging from celebration of founder rights to dire warnings about the dangers of aggressive legal provisions in early-stage investments. Sienna posted a philosophical meditation on ethical restructuring in leadership environments, but turned off comments after an hour. Mark apparently took a sudden leave of absence. Alexander never contacted me directly. But I heard through mutual connections that Hollowbrook's limited partners were asking uncomfortable questions about how they had managed to lose control of a 9-figure asset over a $1 contract clause. Meanwhile, I wasn't idle. I leased a small office just 3 buildings away from NeuroGage's headquarters and began rebuilding. My first move was to call our former lead data scientist, Becca Chen. "I'm starting over," I told her. "Clean slate, same mission. Interested?" "When do I start?" she replied without hesitation. Luis from product development and Tanya from client success followed within days. We didn't conduct formal interviews, just ordered pizza, gathered around a whiteboard, and channeled months of collective frustration into planning the resurrection of what we'd built. We called it Phoenix Gauge. Our logo was a flame in the shape of a dollar sign. The first client came as a surprise. North End Retail, our biggest account at NeuroGage, reached out directly. "We heard what happened," their CMO said when we met for coffee. "That ShopeeBop rebrand was bad enough, but the new dashboards they rolled out last week are useless. We need the real thing." "We're still building infrastructure," I cautioned. "We won't have a deployable product for at least 2 months." "We'll wait," she said firmly. "Just save us a spot at the front of the line." Similar calls followed. It seemed Hollowbrook's strategic direction wasn't resonating with the clients who had signed on for deep predictive analytics, not pretty visualizations. 4 months after my termination, Phoenix Gauge launched with a client list that included 3 of NeuroGage's top 5 customers. Our system was leaner, faster, and more accurate than the original, built on the same core principles but refined by everything we'd learned from our mistakes. 6 months in, our valuation hit $100 million after a Series A round led by a competitor to Hollowbrook. I retained 70% ownership and an ironclad clause ensuring I couldn't be removed as CEO under any circumstances. Which brings me to 6 weeks ago. I was invited to give the keynote at Tech Integrity 25, an industry conference focused on ethical business practices in technology. The original speaker had canceled last minute, and my story had apparently made me something of a minor celebrity in founder circles. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces illuminated by the blue glow of their phones, I told the unvarnished truth about Detroit, about the toaster, about the betrayal, and about the revenge that tasted sweeter than any success I'd had before. The moral of this story isn't about legal loopholes or contract clauses, I concluded. It's about remembering that the true value of any technology company isn't the office space or the marketing strategy or even the client list. It's the innovation at its core and the people who create it. The applause was still ringing in my ears when my phone buzzed with notifications. At first, I thought it was social media reactions to the speech. Then I saw the subject lines. Emergency, system access revoked. All Phoenix servers down. Security breach alert. While I had been on stage, someone had executed a coordinated attack on our infrastructure, locking our entire team out of our own systems. It took less than an hour to trace the breach. The attack had originated from an IP address registered to a shell company that, with minimal digging, linked back to a familiar name, Hollowbrook Capital. They had taken everything offline, our development environment, client dashboards, data processing pipelines, everything. Or so they thought. What they didn't know was that I had learned from my first mistake. This time, I had built a failsafe, a complete backup of our entire system architecture, stored on encrypted servers that only I could access, updated daily and completely disconnected from our main infrastructure. As I stood in our office at midnight, surrounded by my exhausted team staring at locked screens, I pulled out my personal laptop and typed a single command. "What are you doing?" Luis asked, peering over my shoulder. I smiled as the screen filled with code. "I'm remembering something my grandmother used to say, always keep a spare key where they'll never look." By morning, Phoenix Gauge was back online, running on entirely new infrastructure. Our clients experienced less than 8 hours of downtime. which we explained as a planned security upgrade. 2 days later, I received an email from an anonymous address containing a single line: "Impressive recovery. This isn't over." I didn't bother replying. Instead, I called Julian. "They violated about 15 federal laws with that attack," he said after hearing the details. "We have them dead to rights." "I don't want to sue them," I said. "I want to end them." "What did you have in mind?" I told him. He was silent for a long moment. "That's aggressive," he finally said, "and possibly not entirely legal." "Is it illegal?" Another pause. "Not technically, no, but it's in a gray area." Gray is good enough for me. Over the next month, we executed what I privately called Operation Phoenix Fire. While Hollowbrook was focused on attacking our technology, we targeted something more valuable: their reputation. Using our own predictive tools, ironically, the very technology they had tried to steal, we identified key vulnerabilities in their public image and investment portfolio. We didn't fabricate anything. We simply made sure that factual information reached the right people at the right time. Like the fact that 3 of their portfolio companies had engaged in questionable data harvesting practices, or that one of their managing partners had a history of sexual harassment allegations that had been quietly settled, or that they had systematically pushed out founders from 73% of their acquired companies, typically just before major valuation events. We didn't leak this information ourselves. We simply made it available to the technology journalists and industry analysts who would find it most interesting. The rest happened organically. As Hollowbrook's reputation began to crumble, their limited partners started asking questions. Their newest fund, which had been oversubscribed just months earlier, suddenly struggled to close. Portfolio companies began distancing themselves, seeking new investors for their next rounds. Alexander tried to contact me several times, first with threats, then with offers of partnership, and finally with something approaching an apology. I ignored them all. 3 months after their cyber attack, Hollowbrook Capital announced a strategic restructuring. Alexander stepped down as managing partner. Mark and Sienna both updated their LinkedIn profiles to indicate they were exploring new opportunities. The holding company that had once housed NeuroGage was quietly dissolved. Its assets sold off to cover mounting legal costs as investors filed suits alleging mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. And Phoenix Gage? We thrived. 6 months after the keynote incident, we closed a Series B round at a $1.2 billion valuation, making us Detroit's newest unicorn. I retained majority control. The day after the funding announcement, a package arrived at our office. Inside was a toaster, an expensive one, nothing like the cheap model that had blown the circuit in my old sublet. Attached was a note with no signature, just a message. Some fires destroy, others forge. Congratulations on becoming the latter. I don't know if it was from Alexander or someone else at Hollowbrook. I don't particularly care. The toaster now sits in our office kitchen, a reminder of where we started and what we overcame. People sometimes ask if I regret how things played out, if I wish I had simply taken the separation package and moved on, or accepted Hollowbrook's later offers to settle our differences. I tell them the truth, not for a second. Because this story isn't really about revenge, though that part was admittedly satisfying. It's about recognizing your own value and refusing to let others diminish it. It's about building something so good that even those who try to steal it can't fully understand it. And it's about remembering that in technology, as in life, the power ultimately lies with the creators. As for what's next, Phoenix Gage continues to evolve. We're expanding into new markets, developing capabilities that will make our original vision seem quaint. I still write code sometimes, late at night when the office is empty. Not because I have to, but because it reminds me of that cold apartment in Detroit, when I had nothing but my laptop and an idea. The difference is, I'm not crying anymore, I'm smiling. Because I know now what I didn't know then, sometimes the most valuable line of code isn't the algorithm that powers your product. It's the fine print in a contract that protects what's yours. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success built on the ashes of those who underestimated you. $1 at a time.